Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We're excited to bring to you part one of our three-part series today. My name is Lauren Otto. I'm the Executive Director of the CalAsian Foundation, and I'm looking forward to having Yellow Chair Collective share with us today ways to heal through trauma in our lives and our communities. A few things before we dive into today's session. If you can keep your microphones muted until the end where there's a Q&A portion, we'd appreciate that. We ask that you take a moment and go grab a piece of paper and a pen or some colored pencils, as we do have a portion of today's presentation with a small activity that we'd love for you all to participate in. Again, we'd love to see all your faces, so feel free to turn your cameras on. If not, that's okay too. We encourage you to engage with us through the chat throughout the presentation. I'd like to take a moment to recognize our partners and sponsors: California Department of Social Services, Stop the Hate, Sierra Health Foundation, and PG&E. It is now my pleasure to welcome Helen Garcia, who is a mental health therapist and host of the Yellow Chair Collective podcast. Based in Los Angeles, California, Helen is the oldest daughter of a Filipino-American immigrant family. Her mental health treatment specialty is working with creative professionals around the areas of trauma recovery, healing family wounds, and reframing anxious thoughts. In her spare time, she writes and records minimalist content on her blog, Minimalist Creators. We're excited to welcome Helen as our honored guest. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Lauren. Everyone, welcome to today's presentation. I'm very excited to serve you, and I'm about to share my screen. So today's presentation is titled Understanding Trauma and Healing Work, Pathways to Introspection for AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander Communities. And as Lauren said, my name is Helen, and I work for Yellow Chair Collective. We're a psychotherapy group located in Los Angeles, but we also have other practices in states like New York and Washington and Oregon. And so let's get to it. What can you expect and what can you get from today's presentation? I'm going to start with a mindfulness grounding activity for all of us to come to the present moment. And we're going to paint a context of what trauma looks like in today's context. We're going to unpack why trauma is so prominent in Asian American communities. We're going to go through the understanding of what we can do to heal from these traumas that we discuss. And then we're going to close with some affirmations and some question and response time. And so if you can, I want you to just find a comfortable position. Feel free to close your camera. And if you see me looking down, it's because I'm looking at a script to help us go through a 5-minute mindfulness exercise. So if you can find a comfortable seat, this can be on the floor, on a cushion, or on a chair. So if you're sitting on a chair, plant your feet flat on the ground. And if you're sitting on a cushion, take your cushion to the floor. Either sit on your knees with your shins and the tops of your feet rooted on the earth, or cross your legs and arrange the height of your cushion so your knees are lower than the height of your hips. Once you're in a comfortable seat, sit up tall, close your eyes and gaze softly at the ground ahead of you. Seal your lips and breathe from your nose. And I want you to take a deep breath in and out. I know that all of us are coming in with a lot of thoughts, feelings, and anxieties. So I just want to ground us in today's present moment. Take another deep breath in and out. With every exhale breath, allow the weight of your body to release further down towards the ground. With every inhale breath, notice the opposing upward lifting energy that lengthens your spine a little bit taller. With each exhale, release your shoulders, hips, and legs towards the ground. With every inhale, feel the lightness, a gentle upward lifting. Rest here for a moment. I'm going to pause for about 3 to 5 breaths, and I just want you to take 3 to 5 breaths on your own. Now I want you to take the attention more towards the exhale breath. Let each exhale you take become a little bit deeper. Lengthen and extend the exhales gently and comfortably without trying too hard. Don't force yourself. Now I want you to focus on your body. Notice how you're touching the ground. Notice how your hands are resting on your lap. And notice how each thought comes in and out of your consciousness. Some of us might be coming in with anxiety. Some of us might be coming in with a lot of thoughts. And just for the next hour, I just want you to come to this present moment. I want you to think about your safe place. I know the mind is still active. Maybe it's still very active. And anytime you notice that it's wandered off, just release it. Spend no time wondering why. Spend no time wondering what. Spend no time judging the meditation as good or bad. Just come back to your breath. I want you to get curious about how your body is showing up right now in this present moment. What emotions do you notice on your shoulders? What do you notice on your chest? Take a couple deep breaths for me in and out. Now I want you to travel down to your stomach. Do you feel solid or do you feel fluid? I want you to rub your tummy. Sometimes there's nothing rooted or grounded more than coming back to our bodies. Okay, the meditation is over. I want you to open your eyes, come back to the present moment, and get ready for this presentation when you're ready. And if you want, feel free to open your cameras. I would love to see your faces. How did that meditation feel? Feel free to put that in the chat. But for now, I'm going to go into an interactive question for all of you. So, what are we talking about today? We're talking about trauma and how it lives in our bodies. And I'm also reading the chat. Thank you, Janice. Thank you, Lily. Thank you, Susan, for telling me that it felt good. That's awesome. I'd love to continue hearing from you in the future. So this presentation is about trauma, and I want us to come in with a lot of questions of why this matters to us. So oftentimes in Asian American communities, we go through what's called model minority myth, a lot of hidden traumas that are collectively hidden underneath all of the expectations and the stigmas we carry in our culture. And this is called collective trauma. We come in with a lot of expectations about how we should show up. I don't know about you, but as an Asian American older child, it was an expectation for me to show up smart, to show up capable, to show up prepared. I wasn't allowed to make mistakes. There was a stigma around said mistakes, and there was a feeling like I never really belonged in the country that I grew up in. And sometimes these cumulative expectations can get in the way of our feelings of belonging. And so when trauma in that situation is happening, it's hard for us to grasp the impact of trauma because we're constantly in survival mode. And when our brains are in survival mode, it makes you feel as if life can't be grasped. And so some of us might be coming in today with a question of, do I have trauma? And I want you to kind of hold all of that with an open hand, and we're going to unpack those definitions in the next coming slides. So I want us to start out with a statistic. This statistic actually comes from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, a mental health stat from 2022. About 6% of us identify as Asian American or Pacific Islander in the United States, and 15% reported have had mental illness. And I want to mind a stat here where even though it says 15%, Asian Americans are actually the highest rate of suicide in this country. And so 2.9 million is actually an underreported statistic in this country, let alone the skyrocketing mental health crises that's happening right now in the United States. And so mental health not only affects our own mental space and our own personal well-being, it affects the way that we show up in our jobs. It affects our dental health. It affects our mental health. It affects our ability to take in day-to-day information. And so, how are you showing up today? How's your mental space, and how does it dictate the way that you perceive yourself, how others perceive you, and the way that you think others are thinking of you? Oftentimes, when I'm working with Asian American women specifically, it's all about perception. And so I'm curious about, if we do identify as one of the few Asian Americans receiving mental health treatment, what type of mental health treatment are you going into? And how much of that are you aware of? So today we're going to try to understand this big word called trauma. But first, let's get comfortable with a couple of terms. So I want you to take a deep breath. I know we just did grounding, but we're about to learn about trauma. So everyone take a deep breath for me and just let it go. Let go of all of the things that are going on right now and just come to this moment. Here we go. So before I go into the definitions of trauma, I'd love to hear from you. What does healing mean? By the end of this presentation, what do you hope to get out of this? What does healing mean to you? Feel free to put that in the chat. Richer Sand said free. That's really beautiful. Violetta said changed and empowered. Brianna said healing means at peace and be fulfilled. Serena says comfortable being yourself. My favorite quote from Miles Davis is it takes years to learn to play like yourself. Anjali said coping and moving on. Wow, that's a big one. Janice says healing means a return to myself, sometimes to my higher self. Janice, have you done therapy? Because that's so real. Amy says compassion. Nicole says starting a journey to recovery despite how small the first step. That's so good, Nicole. Sometimes healing is just taking the first step. Laura says letting go of the past. That's big. Raya says growth and progress. Kenneth, healing, restoring people to their pre-injury functioning and health. Lan says healing trauma that you carry in your body. That's good. Thank you, everyone. Chris, not being controlled by past trauma. Susan, recovered but different. Wow, you guys are on a roll. Connection between mind, body, heart. Bang says working on what matters to you. Those are all really good points. And I really appreciate everyone's interaction. Last comment I'll read. Kashua says, healing means not being defined by our past. That's good. Okay, so let's move into defining terms. What does trauma mean in the context of AAPI communities? And let's kind of have a cumulative understanding of what it means. So, trauma, according to the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, means a distressing experience that can be mentally, emotionally, or physically overwhelming for a person. It can be caused by an event, a series of events, or a set of circumstances that are experienced as harmful or threatening. I want to pause here before I read the rest. So, notice that it's any perceived event or series of events that are experienced as harmful or threatening. So I want you to be mindful as a participant that no one can tell you that you experience trauma. You are in control of what you experience trauma to be. Sometimes it can be any slight form of racial discrimination. Sometimes it can be the way that you were verbally abused as a child. For others, those things might not even be seen as a perceived harmful event. Others might see a car accident as more threatening or more harmful than any of the events that they go through. And it's important to note that trauma can happen at any age and can affect anyone long after it's occurred. And so, oftentimes, when a client enters my therapy space, they often discount their own experiences by telling me, oh, Helen, it happened 10 years ago. It shouldn't affect me now. But the truth is that anything that has been perceived as a harmful event that has caused you any sort of mental, emotional, or physical overwhelm as a person, so that's any prolonged stress, can result in hurt or wounding. So I want you to kind of take that into account as we're trying to learn and heal from growing through and working with our trauma. And as a therapist, one of the biggest truths that I've learned is that we've all been through something. And no matter how different our life paths can be, all of us can relate to what woundedness or hurt means. And so that's what trauma is. So let's move on and try to figure out what healing trauma means. So, what does it mean to heal trauma? So, according to Self Magazine, they interviewed a high profile journalist named Dr. Hines. And Dr. Hines says that the unifying theme is that you do have to go back to the trauma in some way. I know that's hard for some of us to hear, but sometimes the best way to face things is to face things. Dr. Hines says you have to walk through it to get past it. Ultimately, in most cases, processing trauma means getting in touch with trauma related emotions, thoughts, and conclusions. So, I want to make the differentiation here that just because you've been through the trauma doesn't mean you have to face the abuser. It just means getting in touch with the trauma related emotions, thoughts, and conclusions you've drawn about yourself and the greater world. And so, the things that we've experienced in life impact how we experience life. So I want you to sit with that. How we experience life impacts how we experience life today. And it's allowing yourself the space to integrate that traumatic experience into your life story. And a lot of people think, if I heal my trauma, it will never affect me. But psychology has shown that folks who have successfully processed trauma over a long period of time actually have a higher emotional intelligence and a higher threshold for positivity than the average person, where your happiness index is actually higher. And so trauma healing doesn't mean never having the event affect you. It means allowing yourself to integrate it so much so that you're accepting of self and accepting of the life story that you've experienced by grieving the loss and moving forward from it in a meaningful way. And so if you get anything from what healing trauma means, all it means is finding meaning and acceptance for the trauma you've experienced. And I know that some of us may not feel that way right now, but there are other methods that I'll be talking about in the future of this presentation that's going to help you understand what that looks like. So let's go into the generalization of what causes trauma. Sometimes homelessness, prolonged diseases, stress over a long period of time, a lack of safety, and prolonged fear gets in the way of your ability to move past stress. And so trauma and unforeseen impact can be caused by anything that causes us any sort of feelings of unsafety. And so when you feel unsafe, whether or not it's a loss of a job or financial turmoil that your family has experienced, all of these things can cause trauma. And, how does trauma show up in our body? I want to go into what's called the window of tolerance. And the window of tolerance, everyone has this. It's kind of like everyone has a threshold that they can withstand stressful activities. And so the window of tolerance is when you can manage and cope with your own emotions effectively, even if they're intense, and you can access conscious thought. And so oftentimes when the stress becomes too much, we experience one of two things or both. We experience hyperarousal, which instigates a heightened anxiety, anger, flashbacks, impulsivity, self-injury, or even suicidality, or hypoarousal. This is when you start to numb your experience. And so I know that some of us might be looking at this in the binary, meaning they think, oh, I'm either hyper aroused response or hypo aroused response, but that's actually false. Oftentimes, what I've seen in my work is it's more of a fluctuation. So a person might experience heightened fight or flight response when they're going through anxiety and later crash into numbness. And so how many of us have burnt out because of anxiety and felt a numbness in our ability to feel any sort of enjoyment? And so oftentimes it starts as a hyper arousal and goes into a hypo arousal. But oftentimes when there's too much activation in the body, it can cause feelings of distress. And I want to go into what that looks like for us day to day so you can begin to understand what these terms mean for you. So, hyper arousal, I want you to think of an Energizer bunny. It's just so much emotion. It's your inability to control your internal response or locus of control. And so hyper arousal looks like a lot of angry outbursts, a lot of overwhelming anxiety, trouble sleeping, you can't focus, you're defensive, and you can't connect. And I want to kind of sit with that as a journaling and self reflection response. When do you start to feel hyper aroused? When do things start to feel so much that it's hard to get out of that space? The window of tolerance is basically where you want to get to. It's where you can think and feel at the same time. It's when you can adjust reactions to fit the setting and you can learn and process new information. Oftentimes, when I'm working with a newer client, they have this perception that they can function, but oftentimes, what I'm sensing is that they can't think and feel at the same time. And so that usually means that you're either in a hyper aroused response or a hypo aroused response. And a hypo aroused response is basically feeling a disconnect and a feeling of slowness. Oftentimes, this looks like binge watching shows as a way to numb your emotions, escapism, depression, a lack of energy, feeling shame, numb, or empty. And so, as a self reflection exercise, I kind of want you to think about, do I feel like I can control my own impulses day to day? Or what are some of my moving pieces and parts when I'm moving through the day? Sometimes we don't even realize that we're going into hyperarousal. We just perceive it as I'm being so anxious right now. But I want to highlight, can you think and feel at once? Can you hold that anxiety and think through ways to adjust to those reactions? Or do you find yourself in a hyper or a hypoaroused state? So let's move on. So you might be saying to me, okay, Helen, I know what trauma is. I know what healing is, but what do I do with this trauma? And that's what I want to help you move through in today's presentation. That sometimes in a lot of presentations, when we learn about trauma, we only get what is, but we don't get the how of how to move past that. And so I want to give you that information so that you can learn to move through these perceived traumas. So, as a therapist, there are 4 ways to heal from your trauma. There's somatic experiencing, which is being able to redevelop your relationship with your body. There's EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's really great for folks with PTSD and trauma that they can't discuss or talk about. There's talk therapy, which is what I specialize in. There's mindfulness, which is what we did in the beginning of today's presentation. It oftentimes helps us and those with chronic pain. And so when I work with folks with chronic pain or any sort of back pain, mindfulness is usually the approach that I take. And this is something that we don't talk about as Asian Americans, which is community rituals. We learn things in the context of community, but we've often been burnt in community, and it's hard to trust people. But I would, challenge you, like, what are ways that you can reconnect with your community in the next coming weeks? And so I'm just going to go over what each of these things are so that you get the most information. So, talk therapy. Why is talk therapy effective, you ask? If you can give me a reaction, if you feel comfortable, let me know whether or not you're in talk therapy. Either give me a thumbs up or a heart, what have you. But basically, talk therapy helps us gain more awareness about our own personal patterns. It improves our interpersonal relationships. It gives us better communication skills. Oh, I see some of you reacting. Thank you so much for reacting to my question. Communication skills, uncovering family patterns. And so, talk therapy is effective because you're getting an unbiased perspective and a clinical perspective of your own personal experience. And that person is going to keep things confidential unless you're hurting yourself, someone is hurting you, or you're planning on hurting someone else. So those are the limits of talk therapy and any sort of therapy confidentiality. And talk therapy basically focuses on conscious thought, things that you might hold shame for. And a therapist basically helps challenge your thoughts in relation to anxiety to help desensitize those traumatic experiences and also help you cope with the future of what you may be going through. So that's talk therapy. Some of you might have heard of somatic therapy. And so somatic therapy is basically the Latin or root term for soma, meaning body. It's basically coming back to your body. And oftentimes, when I'm working with someone with a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder, any sort of sexual abuse, oftentimes I notice a disconnect between mind and body. And so, somatic experiencing is basically helping you come back to how your emotions manifest on your shoulders as headaches, unresolved tensions you might have experienced since the trauma occurred, um, unresolved emotional issues that might be manifesting on your neck. Oftentimes, a lot of stress lives in our neck and our back. Sometimes a ton of chronic pain as well. And so somatic experiencing is really helpful for folks with PTSD, complicated grief, depression, anxiety, trust issues. Sometimes the first form of deception is self-deception, that we learn to not trust ourselves when we go through trauma, and issues with self-esteem. And so eating disorders are also things that somatic therapies also help as well. How many of you have heard of EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing? It's a mouthful. It's why it's called EMDR. I'm gonna check the chat here. Vasmir said, I've heard about it before. Lan says, I've also heard about the connections between stress and gut health. Thank you. Very important. EMDR has been shown to help become more effective and probably the most effective form of treatment for folks going through PTSD. And so oftentimes PTSD doesn't just show up with military veterans, it also shows up with people that have been through a lot of family abuse, a lot of verbal abuse, any negative memories that are hard to discuss. EMDR is really helpful for that. Basically, the process of EMDR doesn't just look like going back and forth, which is what a lot of people think it is. It's a therapist basically helping with what's called bilateral movement stimulation in the brain. It first starts with what's called resourcing. So a therapist will ask the client, how do you cope with your distressing memories? Let's talk about that and let's help you move past that. It's really effective if you want short-term results. If the trauma is so much that you want quick and fast turnarounds with your trauma symptoms, this is most effective for that. The common hurdle I notice as a therapist is that most people do want to talk about their trauma. But if you're one of the people that really just want to get past it and not want to discuss it, EMDR is really helpful for that. So that's EMDR. Mindfulness practice. How many of us have a mindfulness activity that we do daily? This doesn't just look like meditation, everybody. This sometimes looks like going on a nature walk. Nature actually, this is new research released by a lot of up and coming research scientists that have shown that there's actually a chemical that's released in trees, specifically oak trees, that decrease your level of stress. And so nature has been shown, just the free things in life have been shown to decrease stress and increase lifespan. So stress has been shown to decrease lifespan over time, but the more time you spend around things that are green, plants, trees, other human beings, because we are part of nature, it's been shown to help increase your level of positivity and gratitude. And so if you want something free and you don't have the means right now to go to therapy, mindfulness is where I would point you. Um, Amy says, I enjoy yoga and hiking. Love it. Janice says, that's why it's always nice to walk my dog. You know what? That's a coping skill I suggest to my clients. If they have a pet, go walk your dog whenever you're experiencing any distressing emotions. It calms the nervous system, and walking actually stimulates the bilateral stimulation in your brain, similar to what therapists do in EMDR, and it calms down your nervous system. Susan, I see you wrote, I work in my garden. Wonderful. Kashua says, long walks with my dog in my neighborhood. You and Janice are thinking the same. And Nicole says, sitting under morning glory and grapevines. Ah, I'm jealous of you, Nicole. Beautiful. Okay, let's move on. Community rituals. Everyone put down on the chat, if you're still listening, what are some of your community rituals? What are you doing to connect with other people? Qigong is a really, really great trauma therapy recovery. Yoga, similar to what Amy said in the chat. Cooking with others, being in a community that makes you feel safe. I'm a Filipina, so karaoke with my family is always very fun. And just talking to a trusted friend that you know accepts and loves you as you are is a really helpful trauma recovery process. Tiffany, weekly improv. I don't think I've ever heard of someone putting that in a presentation chat. Thank you for sharing. Janice says, farmer's market feels nice even if I go by myself. Vasmera says, playing sports, cooking, making food, and eating. Love that. Crafts with my friends, Amy says. And then Eileen says, workout classes and being involved in my church, very important. Um, MS, gardening, making ancestral foods and art. And Susan said, volunteering with Cambodia Town and Historical Society of Long Beach. Love that. Land, coffee, and phone calls with friends to vent and catch up. Very important. Love it. And so if you get anything from community rituals, I want you to ask yourself this: where does my stress and anxiety go? Because our emotions leak, whether it will come out in a conversation we have with our spouse or, at a work related activity, does it go to something productive and healthy? And community rituals are really important. Even something as easy as a boba tea house, like Nicole says, boba is really good, delicious. So let's move on here. So I wanted to give us enough time to do the paper and pen exercise that Lauren discussed earlier. This is an activity I do with a lot of my clients called building a safe house. So if you have time right now, I'm going to give you maybe 5-10 seconds. Grab a pen, grab a paper if you haven't already. And we're going to go through a processing activity to help you figure out what your safe place is. And so we're going to help you face uncomfortable feelings and memories because we can't heal what we don't understand. And so are you ready? Okay. I'm just going to assume that you are. Okay. So everyone, I want you to build a house like you see on the right-hand side. I want you to build 4 base levels with a chimney, a yard on the left-hand side, and I'm just going to guide you through this activity. So give me a reaction when you're done drawing the 4 levels of the house, and I will give you instructions about what to do next. Okay, I see Amy is done. Is everybody else done? I see Tiffany, thumbs up. Okay. I see others have also put their thumbs up. Perfect. Okay, level 1. In the very bottom of the home, I want you to draw areas in your life that you want to change. Thank you, Mariko. List areas in your life that you want to change. So in this example, someone wrote, take better care of my physical health, unload the dishwasher more often, and reduce my own self-judgment. So what do you want to get better in? I'm going to give you 10 seconds. Okay. Now, after you're done drawing the basement of your home, I want you to list or draw the emotions you want to experience more of. Maybe it's happiness, excitement, curiosity, adventure. What do you want to experience more of? I'm going to give you another 10 seconds. Okay. You all ready? Perfect. So next, I want you to write the things that make you feel happy. The reason why I'm doing this activity is because oftentimes we have key things that we already do in our day-to-day lives that help reduce our prolonged stress and our unwanted feelings. And so what makes you come alive? What makes you happy? Or if you're not happy about anything, what's something you want to feel happy about? Maybe you're happy that you woke up this morning, or maybe you're happy that you had a cup of coffee, or that you weren't late to work, or that you showed up to work at all. That can be something you can feel happy about. Okay. I'm going to give you another 5 seconds. Okay. And at the top level or the roof level of your house, I want you to list or draw what makes life worth living. Or if you have nothing that makes life worth living right now, what a perfect life would look like for you. And so for me, what makes a life worth living is family and friends nearby, a career that I love coming home to and coming to work to and talking about, having a health. A lot of people don't have the gift of health. And so what are you grateful for? Okay. If you have done all 4 levels, if you haven't, that's okay. You can refer to the instructions on the left-hand side. But at the roof of your home, who makes you feel protected? Is there anyone in your life that makes you feel safe? Who protects you? And it doesn't have to be a person. Sometimes, this person on the left-hand side put nature. Sometimes you can feel really safe around nature. And feel free on the walls and the side of the home. You can write down the same names if you wrote down names of who makes you feel supported. So the door is something a lot of people don't really like doing, but it's something that helps build what's called your shadow work. Shadow work is the things that we hide from other people. What do you hide from other people? What is it that people might not see when they look at you? What's in that door? Okay. Once you're done drawing what you hide from others or writing down, how do you blow off steam? So at the chimney of your home, draw a cloud and write down what blows off steam or calms you down. For me, I love pickleball and music and playing my guitar. Sometimes I call my mom, but that doesn't always work. You all know what I'm saying. Okay. I'm going to give you 5 more seconds and then we're going to do the last two things. Okay. I'm going to ask a question that is not a marriage decision by any means, but what are 3 or 4 things that drive every decision you make? What are your values in life? And that foundation is going to go on the very bottom of your paper. Very bottom of your paper. This person wrote honesty, caring, trust, and kindness drives every one of their decisions. Maybe for you, it's integrity. For others, it's a sense of responsibility. For others, it's being a trustworthy person. For me, it's peace. I do everything out of peace. Okay. Lastly, what's the billboard of your life? The billboard on the very left-hand side is the things that you gladly show off to people. Maybe you're proud of your relationship, maybe your family, maybe the life that you've built for yourself. Maybe you paid off your student debt and you're happy about that. Maybe you bought a house. Okay. If you're ready, give me a thumbs up. Okay. Tammy gave a thumbs up. Esmar, Ivy, Lan, Bang. Perfect. Okay. Grace. Okay. It looks like everyone is mostly ready. If you feel comfortable, you can show me your house or you can put in the chat what you learned about yourself in this activity. Thanks, Amy. Beautiful. Okay. So the house helps you understand what your starting field is. Maybe you didn't do this activity today, but I hope you learned something about a self-awareness exercise that this is creating in your minds. So, chat question, and then we're going to go into some Q&A because I didn't realize how much I would be talking today. Chat question. How has your understanding of trauma shifted or stayed the same? What have you learned about trauma and trauma healing today? Nicole said it can be present even if it isn't felt. Hmm, that's good. Janice said, I learned more about what we can do with slash about my trauma, and the house can remind me how to lift myself up when I'm feeling down. That's beautiful. Thanks, Janice. Lily said what hyperarousal, window of tolerance, and hypoarousal look like and how I can identify what ones I'm feeling. That's great. Mayor said, I have a lot of people, things in my life that I appreciate and want to preserve despite trauma. I need to find more balance in my life to find the foundational peace I strive for. That's really poetic. Thank you. Gina, how it affects certain parts of our body and how mindfulness can heal. Serena, trauma can mean different things to different people, regardless of whether they seem big or small. Tiffany, even when we heal, it is an ongoing part of our lives that we can make meaning of in our wider story. That's really beautiful. Trauma is personal. No one can tell you if you experienced it or not. Lan, it's important to take inventory of your life and what is life giving so you can pour it into what's important. That's great. Thanks, everyone. So one last question for you before we go into Q&A. Susan, I see your comment. Space to reflect is very helpful in identifying and understanding trauma and the effects of trauma. It's beautiful. Okay. Next chat question. What healing practices or approaches have you found helpful or meaningful? Shua says, healing doesn't necessarily mean we have to be void of any trauma. That's, yes, healing is actually a byproduct of processing trauma. So that's important to know. All for your
You, Helen, again, an amazing workshop. If you all joined us for the first one, thank you for coming back. But Helen, again, thank you. We're honored to have you in our workshop series. We do have a feedback survey. We do ask that you please fill it out as it helps us to better our workshops in the future. So if you could please fill out the survey, we'd appreciate that. Also, I know a lot of you have asked for resources. We have compiled some resources for you all in partnership with Yellow Chair Collective. So please take note of these. Also a list of books to guide you through your healing and community organizing journeys. There's also a link in the chat for a fuller list of books. And next, I invite you all to join us for the second workshop of the series, which will be on September 3rd, racial trauma in the API community. So I encourage you to register for that one if you are not already registered. And lastly, please follow us on Instagram. We do post regularly content on anti-Asian racism, book highlights, and other resources for you all. So thank you again for coming. We appreciate your time. We look forward to staying connected with all of you and have a great rest of your day.